Thank you. So, to give you a little background in the setting of the story, I worked in the Northwoods of Minnesota in the Boundary Waters Canoe area. Some of you may have known, I've seen before, I've told some stories of this place, but I have to give you a little sense of the place before I get to the horror experience, because it's a really beautiful and special place. And I worked up there. I went back in the mid 90s to work in an environmental education center. And so taking kids out into the woods and learning about the ecology of the area. And I led wilderness canoe trips up there in the summers when I was in college. So it was a chance to reconnect to this place, but in the fall, winter, and spring, which is very different. And this place is so magical. The staff once had a cancellation and the kids didn't come for a week, which is not really a bummer if you're working with kids every week. You're like, wow. And a whole bunch of staff, we went on our own trip. And this is in October, and the ice was starting to form around the lake. And you paddled a canoe with a bunch of really seasoned, experienced wilderness people. And it was so quiet, the snow was coming down, the ice kept building. And as you brought your canoe to the shore, it would crackle and crisp and break as the canoe entered the edge of the ice. It was just beautiful and magical. A couple weeks later, I was paddling on my own on a solo trip, and I saw a wolf standing on the bank of the water just staring at me for a while. At night, I would see the northern lights when I got out of my cabin to pee at night, because there was no bathroom in my cabin, which was a one big plus as you look up and just flashes of streaking brilliant green flowing up through the sky. It was amazing. One time when the kids were up there at camp, they would go out on these tracking explorations with their naturalists. I was coordinating the program, so I didn't have a group, so the naturalists would ask me to put on Bigfoot shoes onto my feet and carry some lemonade and some chocolate-covered almonds. And I would hike out ahead of time in case they didn't find any tracks, which often they found really cool tracks like wolf and cougar and bobcat and coyote. I mean, it's amazing, moose. But in case they didn't find anything, they would know where to go for the Bigfoot tracks. And I would leave the tracks. Sometimes I'd hide in the trees and watch because it was so magical. The kids would come up and see these Bigfoot tracks and, oh my God! And then the naturalists would say, oh, I wonder how long ago they were here. And then would take some of the lemonade urine and smell it and taste it, and the chocolate-covered almonds. If I just taste this, I'll know exactly. And the kids would start shrieking and screaming, running all over. So this is the setting of magic, in this place. But as the winter came and you get hunkered down, and it was tons of snow, 13, 15 feet of snow, 20 below zero, and we decided one night when the kids were gone, we had a night in between, to watch The Shining. Not the greatest thing. I don't really like horror movies. I like suspense, like mysteries or things like that, but horror movies weren't really my thing. But so we did that, and then we had to make our way back to our individual cabins at night with no moon and no flashlights through a maze of 13-foot high snowbanks, and it was really scary. And as that is the backdrop for the next part of the story, a few weeks later, my girlfriend came to visit, and so she came from Washington State, where she was living, to Minnesota. We hadn't seen each other in months, and this was before you could text each other. There was no email. There was only a radio phone at camp, and you didn't know who else was going to be on, like as a party line. So, if you have any kind of personal conversation, someone would get on and be like, is that Matilda? Like, have you got any knitting going on there? And I'm like, no, this is private, sorry. And so we didn't have much private time, and we wrote letters back in the old days. And so you can imagine there's a lot of excitement when she was coming, and I rented a cabin at a nearby YMCA camp that was a family camp. So I had a cabin right on this beautiful frozen lake in the middle of the winter, and we went to the cabin after she got settled, and we made amazing dinner, and we had some bottles of wine, and pretty soon the clothes were flying off. And as any good horror story, as you've seen in any movies, the worst part always happens when everybody gets naked. And so as soon as the nakedness started to happen, and I'm thinking this is going to be awesome, we heard from far away, "Help me! Help me!" I'm serious. And I cannot understand what is happening, because we are in the wilderness. We're on a frozen lake that's 20 miles long. The lake is 6 feet thick of ice. There's 20-foot snowbanks everywhere, and it's 20 below zero. Who is outside? And it came again. "Help me, please!" And it's getting closer. And so I start to get my clothes on. Elizabeth's like, "Don't go out there." She liked horror movies even less than I did. And I said, I have to go out, because I don't want to bring the horror person into the cabin with my mostly naked girlfriend. That's not a good plan. And so I got my sorrels on, my hat, my jacket, and I went out with a flashlight, and I came around the corner, of the cabin. I just made it around the corner, like right to the big, massive frozen lake, and the total pitch black, and I run smack into a giant man, just boom, right around to the cabin. And he's like, help me, please, I fell through the ice. And he is obviously really upset. I can smell a lot of alcohol in his breath, and it's still not making any sense. It is impossible to fall through 6 or 8 feet of ice in the middle of the winter. So I was like, what is happening here? I couldn't get, he was wearing a thin flannel shirt and a thin down vest and jeans, and that was it. But I could see his ice was forming all around his jackets. And I'm thinking, well, if you really did fall through the ice, how are you not dead right now? I don't understand what's happening, but I knew I had to get him warmed up. I didn't want to take him into the cabin with Elizabeth because it was a very tiny cabin, and again, nakedness is going on. So I'm like, there was another cabin that I saw a group of people had rented, and I'd run into them earlier, and they had a big cabin with a massive fireplace. So I took them to the fireplace there. I explained the unexplainable story that this guy had fallen through the ice, and we needed help right now. They let us in, amazingly. Don't ever do that if you're in a horror situation, just don't let them in. And they opened it up, and we stood by the fire. I tried to get this guy out of his clothes because I knew he needed to warm up, and he had no interest in that. And he started to explain the story while he did drink a sip of some hot beverage and stood in front of the fire. He said that his truck had actually fallen through the ice. And I knew people had drive on the lake. Sometimes there's a shortcut to town rather than drive the real long way, but still it's not making any sense because it's such a thick amount of ice. Like, you just aren't going to fall through with your truck. And he said he got on the roof of his truck, and as the truck went through the ice into the water, he dove off of the top of his truck onto the ice, just barely making it, and then walking probably like 10 miles to where I found him. And I still don't know what's happening, but I still know I don't want him to die because that's going to be a big headache, and I don't think I'm going to get axe murdered right now. Luckily, I feel safer from that. But he said, I just want to go home. And so, all right, I'll take you home. I don't really want to do that, but I think it's the only thing to do. And so I ran back into the cabin. Now, meanwhile, Elizabeth has no idea what is happening, and my attention has completely been on this guy. And she thinks that I've been chopped up into many little pieces. So when I burst through the door, she's happy but also upset, and she's on the bed like in with blankets, like cowering. And I'm like, it's okay, but I got to get my car keys. I'm driving this guy to this cabin, and I didn't really take time to explain because I'm trying to get him to not die. So I just took the keys and I said, I'll be back soon, and I off again. Somehow I got my car started at 20 below, which is not always an easy task. He piled in and he directed me to where he lives through many, many back roads with snowbanks. And I dropped him off. I'm like, do you want help getting into your house? Because I'm thinking, if he can't get through the front door, he's going to just die in a matter of minutes here. But he's like, no, I'm fine. And I'm like, okay, I'm done with my task of helping here. And he went off, and I found my way back to the cabin. I got back to my cabin, excited to resume our, reunion activities. But little did I know that, axe murdering potential random strangers screaming for help in the middle of the night and then racing off in your car, it kind of puts a damper on the romantic evening. And so Elizabeth was still very upset, understandably, because she didn't know what the hell was going on. And if I explained finally what had happened and apologized that I was so focused there, and we got it all together, but that was it for the night. And so luckily we had a couple of days together, and a few days later, I was back at the camp that I was working at, and I ran into Joe, who's the caretaker. And Joe knows everybody and everything in the North Woods. And I asked him, I told him the story. And Joe said, I know that guy. That's Bob. He does this all the time. I'm like, what? He does this all the time? He drops his truck through the ice. He says, yeah, this has got to be the 4th or 5th time he's done that. And I was like, wow, how does that happen? And he said, there's a spring. The lake narrows at a certain place, and there's this underground spring on the side close to shore. And if you go too close to that, you'll right through the ice. Obviously, Bob's a slow learner, and I just can't imagine the insurance conversation. It's like, yeah, sorry, I just did it again, but I'd really like a new truck, please. So thank you.